Along for the Ride was first published in 2009, and then it got optioned in 2019. So, Sarah and Sophia, can you tell me more about the journey of getting here over the last decade or so?
I can say yes, the book was published in 2009. And at the time, I've always said it's hard to kind of get my books broken down to like one sentence, that's easy to pitch, like girl falls in love with vampire or whatever, like the easy thing. It's always like, oh, there's this girl and then these things happen. And my agent used to joke with me that we just needed to wait until my readers were old enough to be in development positions. And that's kind of what happened, because a girl named Alyssa Rodriguez was laying by a pool in Arizona, reading my books when she was in high school and college. And when she got to a point where she could option something, she was very interested in them. So it's a wonderful thing to have a book that's kind of already out there and has had its own life. And now it can be this totally new, cool thing.
Yeah. And Sophia, how did you come to the project?
I actually had not read Sarah's books previously. This was my first introduction to them, which I think was kind of a positive because it meant I got to come to them with fresh eyes and be like, okay, what's the movie version of this? As opposed to having like read a book and loved it and then struggling to find the movie in the book that I'd read and didn't really want to change anything in. After the book had been optioned, Alyssa sort of found me and sent me the book and asked if I would be interested in adapting it. And I read it and immediately saw the movie and immediately loved it and knew how I would do it and said, I would absolutely love to adapt it, but only if you also let me direct it. And luckily, she said yes. She and all the other producers involved, Brandon Kliss and the team at Netflix. And then I started writing it in summer of 2019, I think. Sarah, is that when we first talked?
That sounds right, yeah.
So it feels like a very long time ago, pre-pandemic. And the very first thing that I did was Sarah and I had like an epic, 3-hour-long conversation where we talked about the book and what was important to her and what was important to me. And I think luckily and kismetly, we were both just incredibly aligned on what those things were. And so then from there, it felt easy for the next couple of months until the world shut down. We took a little break and we came back to start filming it in the spring of 2021.
Sophia, what propelled you to put in that stipulation of directing it? Was it just that you saw it so cinematically when you read it?
There was that. It was that I knew how I would make the movie. But I think also, I'd just done 2 YA adaptations as a screenwriter. I did the first To All the Boys I Loved Before and also the second one. And so for me, in terms of my own career and what felt exciting and challenging, I feel like just coming in as the screenwriter and writing the script and creating this adaptation was something I'd just done, and so I knew I could do it and I knew I could do it well, but there wasn't a huge challenge in there for me. But if I could also direct it and both make the movie exactly as I saw it and wanted to make it, but then take on that added challenge of directing my first movie, that felt incredibly exciting to me.
And for Emma and Belmont, how familiar were you with Sarah's work coming into this project and how helpful was the novel to you in your process?
We had different experiences with the Sarah Dessen universe. Emma had been a reader previously, right?
Sort of. I hadn't read Along for the Ride before auditioning. All of my friends were obsessed with it. So when I told them I had this audition, they all freaked out. Yeah. And then once I auditioned, initially, I got the book and have read it many, many times since. And it sort of was like a Bible for me. It's from Auden's perspective, so it was like a really special resource.
Yeah, I hadn't read the book when I auditioned or until I got the part. For me, the book was like a super useful resource to understand the world of Colby.
Yeah.
I think the way that Sarah painted that setting was extremely helpful. And the way that Fia translated it was also helpful. And then when we showed up in North Carolina, I was like, well, I'm here right now. It was kind of a trip to be like submerged in it. But yeah, no, I used the screenplay predominantly to build character, and I'm super grateful for the Sarah Dessen universe that gave us this opportunity.
Sarah, this is the second time your books have been made into a film because How to Deal in 2003 was based on 2 of your novels. How did this experience compare? What was different about it?
Oh, just very different. I mean, the world is different for starters. The fact that we are streaming things. I mean, 2003, a long time ago. These people, I don't even want to think about how young these people were in 2003. I don't even want to.
Mandy Moore is playing an old woman now.
I know, exactly. It's crazy. First, they took two books, that weren't really related and put them into one script. So I always knew it was a little bit different. Whereas with this one, Fia and I had this conversation and I felt like she just got it, and as much as I enjoyed everything about How to Deal, and it was great for my books, I just feel like with this one book and that she really understood the story. She was a new mom, and there's a new mom in the book, and I wrote the book when my daughter was an infant. So we just meshed on so many things. And it's just been a dream. I mean, the fact that they were able to film in North Carolina, I live in North Carolina, I'm from here, was just amazing. Like in COVID, I get to get in my car and drive 2 hours and pull up at a beach where these people are all dressed as my characters. Like it was the most insane thing. I kept having to go breathe in various places, away. I was trying to be really cool in front of everybody, but it's a lot, it's just, wow. So it's been very different because I've been allowed to be really involved, I think partially because they were filming here. So I was able to go down, and also because I was just, I talked to Fia, and I definitely had a lot of conversations with the producers, along the way too. So it's been great.
Yeah. And then for Emma and Belmont and Sarah as well, like, what was that relationship like between the three of you? You said the book was a huge resource for you, but you also had Sarah there too. So how did that work?
The same way that, like, when Sarah was on the film set, she was just so excited and almost overwhelmed. We felt the exact same way meeting her. We were like, Sarah, without you, none of us are here. So it was like such a cool blending of the two spaces. Having the author on set was extremely useful for us. We had a lot of great times with Sarah when we were out there. And we're so glad that she was nearby and was able to join us so much.
I have a distinct memory of, I don't think I realized when Sarah was going to come, and we were shooting the prom scene and we were very much in it. And I remember seeing from a distance her up on the pier and grabbing Bella and freaking out because she is like, she's the reason of the world. She created it. And it was so exciting. And then, we got to pick her brain a bit, and it was just so great. Everyone was so collaborative, and we got to just like explore the characters through so many different ways.
Yeah.
I walked into like this big scene and everyone's in these amazing costumes, and I walk up and there they all are, and Emma sees me and pokes Bella, and they both turn around and wave at me, and I like burst into tears, and I'm trying to control myself and have to walk away, and Alyssa Rodriguez comes up and then she starts crying. We're both crying. I was like, so unprofessional, stop. But it was just, there are these moments that you just can't imagine. Like this book that started in my head over in my kitchen island when my daughter was a baby is now this. It's just unbelievable. It just feels like the greatest gift in the world. It's amazing.
For Belle and Emma, did you guys have one piece of advice or insight from Sarah that like really clicked for you with your characters?
Well, I would say prior to filming, I actually hadn't talked to Sarah, and it was mostly through Fia. And however, I feel like I had a way into Sarah through the book. Mm-hmm. So actually, I feel like we started building the characters prior to talking to Sarah.
Yeah, I think we did. Well, we did a lot of character work with Fia when we first all got together in North Carolina. But like you said, the direction that Fia gave us was just an extension of Sarah's universe too. So it wasn't until Sarah came to set that we got to talk about character with her. But yeah, we got a little advice from both of them.
Yeah. Well, they didn't need me. That's the truth. I mean, by the time I got down there, they knew what they were doing. And I knew, it's kind of like apples and oranges. Like I love my apple. I did great with this, but this is Fia's orange, and I want her to. So it's like, and I appreciate, like, I get it. Like the script is a totally different thing from the book. And I would think it would be confusing in some ways. I don't know. I'm not an actor. Thank God. I'd be terrible. But that if you read the book and then read the script, you'd have all this other stuff kind of clogging your head that is not necessary. And you probably have enough you have to keep up there again. So I'm interested with, I think with Sofia, we talked about this already today about how she was able to sort of take all the really important stuff and amplify it. And that's what I'm most grateful for.
Yeah, Sofia, speaking of your orange, as is the process with adaptation, things have shifted and moved around. You've made Eli and Auden's relationship more central and kind of bumped up where it starts in the storytelling, particularly with the quest. You've traded bowling for mini golf. Can you talk about those choices and then sort of how you approached all of that?
Well, I'd say at the beginning, it was great to start with that conversation with Sarah, because then I knew, and Sarah gave me great license in that conversation where she said, the book is the book and the movie's the movie. So feel free to do what you need to do. And that's just a great gift for an author to give a screenwriter, because you have to change things. Like, there's no way it's going to be exactly the same, because you don't have the real estate in a movie that you do with a book to like go dig deep into everyone's backstory to keep all those stories alive. So you really have to boil it down to the essentials. And something I like to do when I start an adaptation is not read the book too many times, because there's so much great stuff in a book. So I think if you read it too many times, you're like, and that detail is so good, I would love to get that in, and that detail is so good. And there's just no way to fit all of that in. But I think if you read it through on the first time, whatever you remember, those are like, that's what's really important. That's the stuff that you really needs to be in the movie. And the stuff that you sort of doesn't stay with you after that first read maybe is like wonderful, but not essential. And so I try to do my outline in my first draft off of like one or maybe two reads, but not more than that. And then after that, I like to let the script be the script and to say, what do we have here? And how can I make this the best version of itself? And, you know, you'll go back to the book at times for reference or to see if you can deepen something, or maybe if there's something you're confused about. But once I have the script, I like to let that be the living thing, because otherwise I think you can really confuse yourself, sort of like what Sarah was saying about with the actors, if you're trying to keep too many things in your head at one time. And with the actors, you know, we talked a lot about character, and there's the characters that exist in the book and then the characters that exist in the screenplay. But what I really wanted Belmont and Emma to do was to discover these characters for themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, like, this is what you read and this is what I can tell you, and we can talk about anything you want to talk about, but who is Auden to you? Who is Eli to you? And they both kept character journals when they first got to North Carolina. We both had like lengthy conversations about anything they wanted to talk about. But I really wanted them to find who these people were, not for me to tell them who these people were.
I would say two of the bigger changes you've made is that Hollis, who is Auden's brother in the book, is gone. And also when Heidi and Robert are having their issues, it's Eli's mom in the book who sort of helps with the baby. And in the film, it is Auden's mom. Yes. What drove both of those changes? Was it about simplifying?
So the one about Eli's mom, I always knew I wanted that to be Victoria, both because Eli's mom is sort of a periphery character who's not really involved in the larger story. And in the book, there's so many different storylines. And in the movie, we actually have a lot of storylines for a movie, but you need to find a way to blend them all together and make them seem like one cohesive story. And Sarah mentioned this briefly, but the movie is so much about mothers and daughters. And Sarah was a new mother when she wrote it, and I was a new mother when I was adapting it. And there's this idea when you become a mom that you realize that your mother was always just a woman and a person, whereas you want her just to be a mother. And so I think you start to really have empathy for your parents as people once you have children yourself. Not that they did everything perfectly, not that they didn't make mistakes, but that was something we really wanted to explore in this story. And I think Auden starts the movie with a lot of sort of anger to her mom and the way she's been raised, and kind of maybe more misplaced anger to her mom than her dad, because her mom has been there. And so she's seen the mistakes she's made, whereas her dad sort of gotten a get out of jail free card by not being there. And she thinks if she'd been with him, maybe it would have been different. But then through the movie, she learns that's not necessarily the case. And so I think this idea of Auden sort of forgiving her mom a little bit and realizing that she did the best she could, and it doesn't mean their relationship's perfect, but they know that they love each other at the end. It really made sense for when she needed help for her to call that person who, though not perfect, had always been there for her. And that's her mom, you know, and then for her mom to come and help, and to help her stepmother. And you know, though Auden and Victoria both started out as characters who maybe judged Heidi for being a different kind of woman than they were, they also, you know, come to a place of mutual understanding and respect. And this idea that just because we're different doesn't mean we're enemies. And as a child of divorce myself, my parents have never had the sort of divorce relationship you always see on television where like they hate each other and they said bad things about one another to me. They've always been friends, and my mom has always been friends with the women my dad has dated and now with my stepmom. And so I also wanted to show that like that is another way that people are divorced. And, you know, Kate Bosworth is a stepmother herself, and her relationship with her stepdaughter is one of the most important ones in her life. And so when we talked for the first time, one of the things she said was, I'm so glad to see a stepdaughter relationship that's full of love and not full of hate. And so that was easy, making that decision to have that be Victoria instead of Eli's mom. And then with Hollis, that one was a little harder. Hollis was in the script. We filmed a whole conversation between Auden and Hollis. This wonderful actor, Brian Miskell, was voicing Hollis for that conversation. And we really, really tried to keep him alive. But in terms of simplifying the story and sort of giving Auden agency at the beginning of the movie, because in the original script, we had this frame from the book that's sort of an Easter egg still in the movie, the best of times frame, and Hollis sort of asking Auden to fill it. But what we found was it had to be Auden's decision to want to fill that frame being a metaphor for living this other kind of life. And when you had it being her brother sort of telling her to do it, you took that agency away from her. And so it sort of was just necessary, but we found out late that Hollis couldn't live in the movie the way we had anticipated.
Emma, you mentioned before the book is from Auden's point of view. It's first person, which means we get a ton of her inner monologue on the page. Tell me more about the challenge of internalizing that and having to bring that to life when you're not necessarily verbalizing everything we have on the page.
I think what was so great about the book is it was a set of clues that I could use as I was filling out who Auden is. And like Fia was saying, for her, I read the book once, and the most important thing to me was what stuck in my head. What were my first impressions? What was she feeling? What were her insecurities? What did she care about? You know, I think what's so special about Auden and what's so relatable about Auden is a lot of what she says kind of contradicts what's going on internally. And it's precisely that tension that makes her so incredible and human and multifaceted, and what drew me to her so much. So I think having the book, I'm a big journaler myself, so I would do long journal entries from her perspective, kind of channeling the book, channeling the script, channeling all the conversations. And then you kind of like let it all go when you get on set and see what arises naturally. But it was all just clues to continue to fill out her in this world, I think.
Yeah. And Belmont, I think one of the defining features of Sarah's books is that she writes these quintessential teen hunks in a sense. So coming into that, I mean, was that intimidating? Like, how do you quiet that voice in your head of like, this character is attractive to a lot of people?
That I wasn't really too concerned with. Like, Eli is a pretty sensitive male lead. And so I got to play around with his character quite a bit. And like Fia said, in the way that Sarah gave her license to adapt the screenplay from the novel in the world of, a format that will work. Fia also gave us that license. So I brought a lot of myself to the character. His struggle was like a personal one to me, and the obstacles that he overcame, I felt connected to. So it was that dynamic of, Eli is recluse and he is mysterious, but there's a lot more to him that he's just not allowing himself to experience. So playing around with that dynamic of, Eli is the extrovert, he is the life of the party, but he is choosing not to be, was a challenge and something that we worked on a lot. And I'm grateful for Sarah Dessen for writing such great male characters and being able to embody one of them.
Oh, that's very nice of you.
Very nice
Sarah,
of you.
Sarah, with over 10 years since you first wrote this, I mean, how do Emma and Belmont compare to that Auden and Eli in your head? Like, have they replaced the ones that were there when you were writing now?
I think kind of. I mean, it's like when you're writing is when it's the most important that they are really, really real in your head. And, with Auden, I'd always been interested in this idea of sort of effortless perfectionism, and I used to teach at UNC Chapel Hill, and I had a lot of undergrads, these women who, they had to have perfect grades. They had to look good. They had to act really easygoing. They had to be able to hang out with the guys, but also be really cool with the girls, and make it all look very easy at the same time. And I just was watching girls imploding, left and right all around me as an instructor. So I really liked the idea of this girl who had supposedly done everything right. And then suddenly, she felt like maybe everything. I love the line about, there's nothing about me you couldn't learn by looking at my transcripts, because I was like the opposite. I was not a good student, but I have a lot of good stories. That's why I'm a writer, But I think enough time had passed too that I wasn't so super connected, and that's helpful too. Like, I think the book had already been out. It had done its own thing. It has its following. And I was just so pleased that it was the first one that they selected, because I do feel like it resonates right now. I think it would resonate at any time, but there's so many things. And just going back to what Belle was saying about Eli, I think, we all know that everyone is dealing with loss and with change, after this pandemic, a lot of people, whether you're talking about it or not. And so I think people can relate to, something happened to him and he doesn't want to talk about it. It's not just him. And I think there's just so much there in terms of that generation too, of things that they missed, and this bucket list of things, you didn't get to go to prom, you didn't get to do these things because of the virus or whatever else. So it's a good time for it. I really feel like.
Sofia, having done To All the Boys before this, how did this compare? And what do you think makes YA so ripe for adaptation?
Well, the biggest difference between this and To All the Boys is that I was directing this. So, with To All the Boys, it was sort of a lovely experience writing it. I wrote it almost like I'd write a play. I remember that as being a very solitary experience of me alone in my writer space. And then I sent it off and they made it. And I was very lucky that I got to go into the edit room, which I love doing because it's where sort of the final draft of the story is created. But my experience with To All the Boys was all about story, both in the writing and then in the edit. Whereas my experience with Along for the Ride has been, everything, like working with Emma and Belmont on the other actors, working with our fantastic crew, working with Sarah. And so really creating the whole world has just been a dream and something I've really loved doing on this. And then as far as YA, I think that everyone is sort of always interested in self-exploration. We all want to know why we made certain decisions, or why we turned out the way we are, or where our paths are going to lead, or why they led the places we're going to lead, or alternate realities we might have had. And I think we keep going back to YA because the age these characters are where they're making these decisions and the people they're falling in love with really become a part of you on, your journey growing up, whether you remember why something became a part of you or not. And so I think sometimes when we think of these stories, we think like, oh, we love looking back on them because we're thinking about what falling in love was like. But it's really through the process of falling in love, we were discovering more about ourselves or becoming more of who we were going to be. And those people have sort of left an imprint on us, but it remains about yourself and you and who you are. And so I think that's why we love exploring these stories, but also, thinking about our own selves at those ages. It's a time of lots of change. You're sort of setting the stones for who you're going to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah. For all of you, music is a huge part of this story. Sarah, you included a playlist in the back of the book.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize they were re-releasing that book without me updating. I hadn't even looked at the playlist in years, and I was like, oh goodness. But it is like a full time capsule from 2009. Of what I was
listening to. A throwback playlist is just as good as a current playlist.
Just as good, right? Yes, of course.
But for the actors and for Sofia, did you reference that playlist and how did you approach the music this time? I know you had Beach House as a partner here. So what was that like?
Well, I had my own playlist. I actually didn't even realize there was a playlist in the back of the book, but I had my own playlist that I wrote to and wrote some of those songs into the movie that were in the script and that are still in the movie. And I've always been a huge music fan. And so it was a very important part of just the world building and like the sonic identity for the movie. We talked about the music from the get-go. I would play Belle and Emma songs on set. Beach House being involved, they were the only person who I could think of doing the score. And if they'd said no, I don't know what we would have done. But our music supervisors, Jessica Burnt and Jane Abernathy, were incredible. And I sent them my own playlist, my writing playlist in prep. And then they sent me back a playlist sort of inspired by that one, but also we had talked about each character in the movie, what their tastes were. And so that playlist also included like, these are what we think these different characters would like. And then most of this music in the movie are a combination of that playlist that Jessica and Jane sent me in prep and the one that I made when I was writing. But yeah, it was very present throughout. And Emma and Belle and I talked about it a lot.
Music was huge for us. Fia and I and Emma had conversations about music constantly, and we used it to inspire a lot of elements in performance and in development. I actually had my brother make me a playlist right before I got to North Carolina. He's like phenomenal at making playlists. So I told him everything I could about the character and about where I was going to be, and he sent me back a nice folder of music that I used. And I leaned on and I rode my bike around Colby like every single day listening to it. And I know that Emma and Fia and I had tons of conversations. And I mean, we would be taking 5 or whatever, and Fia would pull up a song like, this is kind of what I want this to feel like. And that was super, super useful.
Yeah, making playlists is my favorite thing about playing a new part. And with this one, the crazy thing, and Fia and I have talked about this, is I made a playlist before I arrived in North Carolina. And I made a playlist this time with songs that to me represented Auden pre-moving to Colby and then post. So pre to me is like Fiona Apple, like kind of like the intellectual, more type of music. And then after, when she moves, most of my playlist was Beach House way before I knew they were doing the movie, because they have that album Teen Dream in 2010, and the book came out in 2009. And it just feels like the air, the beach of being in Wilmington in North Carolina and in Colby. So then when we found out that they were doing the movie, it was like, this is perfect.
Yeah. It was important because like every summer has a soundtrack. You know what I mean? Like when you hear a song, you're like, oh, that was this summer. So it's also helpful to get in the summer mindset of like, okay, what would they be listening to this summer?
I remember when I pitched this movie, I said to the producers, like, I want this movie to have a soundtrack that the summer after it comes out, all the teenagers are listening to in their car on the way to the beach.
Yeah, they will be. It's a
It will be. Yeah.
Before we turn the page, let's take a quick break. Welcome back to Screen After Reading. Let's get back into the conversation with the cast and crew that we booked for this episode.
Sarah, do you find a lot of overlap between the actors and Sofia making a playlist to prep their storytelling and you having one as an author as you're writing?
Yes. I mean, way back, I started doing, because I always have songs that I'm listening to while I'm writing, and then I'll put them all in a playlist. And then for Along for the Ride, I think was one of the first times that my publisher was like, well, let's write it up and give it to people. And always, because like showing someone your playlist is kind of like showing someone your diary a little bit. You know, I mean, it's like they're the ones that are made for public, and they're the ones that somebody picks up your phone and is like, oh, what's this? And you're just like mortified because like I have the Muppets and John Denver or whatever, you know, on my phone. But, you know, I think it's very cool. And I have to say, I only had 2 asks about this movie. One was I really wanted an Avett Brothers song to be in this movie because I am from North Carolina. The Avett Brothers are from North Carolina. They're my favorite band. And I just felt like it would be just very cool nod to North Carolina. The other one that was that my daughter would get to come to the set, but because of COVID, that didn't work out. But, you know, but we did. Sofia was so open to this. And, you know, again, her discretion, I said, I just want an Avett Brothers song in there somewhere.
Yeah, so there's a scene in the movie where one of the characters sings at a bonfire at a party. And we are trying to, and there's a joke in the movie that she always sings the same song. And we are trying to figure out what that song should be. And in my head, I was like, I feel like that would always be like a Fleetwood Mac song, that someone's going to sing the same song at a bonfire all the time. But Fleetwood Mac songs are very expensive. But then also when Sarah said this thing, it was really early on that she was like, I want an Avett Brothers song in the movie. And, you know, the movie is meant to be timeless. It's meant that to feel like it could take place in any era, but because the book came out in 2009, I sort of think of parts of it as being like an homage to that era. So I went on the Avett Brothers Spotify page and I found their album that came out in 2009. And there's a song on it called January Wedding. And I listened to it and I was like, this is the bonfire song.
Mhm.
And then we were so lucky that Samia Finnerty plays Esther, and Samia is sort of an indie rocker and amazing performer. And so she sang that song for us, and it was just magical and beautiful. And it's one of my favorite moments in the movie, but it was the absolute perfect song. And I never would have found it if it wasn't for Sarah saying, I remember you said it's more important to have an Avett Brothers song in the movie than for me to be in the movie. And I said, Sarah, I think we can do both.
I was really at a point where I thought it had to be one or the other, and I was like ready.
Like, you only had so many asks.
I know.
She's a
My
great
two
negotiator.
I know. What's that?
It's funny too, because the joke in the movie is that like, we're so tired of hearing that song, but every time Logan would pick up the guitar and Samia would open her mouth, we would like, it was just the most magical thing. I could not get enough of it. Yeah.
One of the distinguishing features of this story is that Eli and Auden's time is the nighttime, and that's when they hang out. How does that complicate filming, both as a director and as an actor? I can imagine that that's a challenge.
We just had a lot of night shoots, like a lot of night shoots. And
Sorry, you guys.
it's funny because you brought up the mini golf scene before, that how it used to be a bowling alley. And, I would guess because this was my first movie that I directed, I wasn't really thinking about life on set when I was writing these things. And I remember saying like mini golf is so much more summery than bowling. And it's also so much more cinematic than bowling. And so it should be mini golf because it's going to look beautiful. And everyone has these memories of like these East Coast summer beach towns and these mini golf courses. And then we're on the mini golf course and it's 50 degrees and we're freezing and Emma's in this tiny, tiny dress. And we have like 7 different night exterior lighting setups, which take a long time and are very complicated. And our first AD, I told her that in the book, it was in a bowling alley. And she just looked at me with like daggers in her eyes. And was like, a bowling alley, we could film day for night. A bowling alley has beer. And I was like, you're right.
Yeah. Well, when I got into town, I don't know if this was a similar experience for you, but like I got into Carolina Beach at night and the pier was like loud. I was like, this is a happening place. So I like went down, like had a beer. It was like the middle of the night. And just from then on, I was basically nocturnal because we didn't have much of a choice. We were shooting so much stuff at night. And then we got used to it. I mean, we were finishing shoots and the sun was coming up and that was just kind of our schedule. But it was, it was perfect. We basically lived the sleep schedule that our characters did, except for, Monday mornings when we'd have to start early and like, we'd be up filming until, Saturday morning and then we'd have to start Monday morning. But I found it super enjoyable. And a lot of those night shoots were just an absolute blast. There was that few week stretch where all those kids were together and like, that was just so much fun.
Yeah, I think it's intense, but it was so fun.
Yeah.
And I think what's so special about night is it's like, everyone's asleep. We ordinarily shouldn't be awake. And yet we're all of these people, we've created this ecosystem, creating this movie. Auden and Eli are making memories. And it's like precisely because nobody else is awake that they get so close. And so similarly, we got so close with the cast and the crew because we were all up at 4 a.m. in a food fight with food all over, swimming in the ocean at 5 a.m. Like these things that were so fun. I'll remember forever. And so it kind of like, it added to the...
But we had like no choice but to be immediately endeared to one another because we were just going through these things all together.
Like, well,
but
it
was a great group of people to do it with. We had so much fun.
Well, speaking of the food fight, I was going to ask about that because it's a major turning point in both the novel and the film for the characters' relationship. But I could imagine that was messy to film. Like, what was that like?
Man, it was a blast. We spent a lot of time on Food Fight. And over the course of the evening, everybody's like mustard was just drying to their shirt. So, but the smell did not dissipate in any capacity. It only got stinkier.
The thing is, we got the least of it because we start the food fight and then we go into the house and have a scene, just the two of us. Wow. Meanwhile, everyone else is doing like a long, very real, very coleslaw, noodle filled ketchup food fight where we got to take shelter. But I remember when we did it, we have to run into the house and the food fight, everyone became very primal and animalistic. Like something
it was competitive.
It was very competitive. And I remember getting like pushed and Belle had to like pull me inside and we had like egg salad cake to our whole bodies. But again, it's like, that was so fun. And I've never been in a food like Auden, a lot of these experiences I've actually never done before. So I was like,
how long did it take you to get the baked beans out of your hair?
Oh man.
That's a good question.
Well, the thing is like, yes, the beans come out in a shower, but the smell takes like a little bit longer. And then like the physical memory of having a crown of beans that kind of trickles on your back, that also takes a little while to
We had you
emotionally
for
come
like
out.
at least an hour on your mark, just like placing the beans, like making sure they're in the same
It was
place
a
for
perfect
continuity.
triangle. But
We
then
also were up against it time-wise that night because we shot that whole party in one day. So we had a really long day. We had almost 6 pages plus a food fight. And so we had no time to set up between food fight takes. So we had one shot to get the food fight. So we did the potato salad smear on Eli's face many times. And then Belle and I had a little secret code for when he was going to dump the beans on Emma, which we did, so that Emma didn't know it was happening. But then with the food fight, we just had to get it. So we had 2 cameras that day, and our DP and our Steadicam op went in handheld with trash bags over their heads and over their cameras. And we were just like, all right, everyone, you just have to go for it. And they will be in the food fight filming, but like, this is our one shot, don't hold back. And it was chaos.
And it's important to note that Alyssa Rodriguez, one of our executive producers, is heavily featured in the food fight because she wanted to be in the background of anything. And it just happened that food fight was the scene that we picked for her. And she was, I mean, if you watch, like I like to say that Alyssa won the food fight because she really, really was aggressive.
yeah, she had ketchup and mustard bottles and she was like going at it. It was really
It was tactical. I mean, I gotta give it up. She nailed it.
Well, it was COVID. So we were coming up against a problem where we didn't have enough background actors because we could only book 40 background actors per scene or per day. And then sometimes they wouldn't even all show up. And especially when you're doing something like filming a food fight, maybe people are like, I don't want to be in a food fight. I'm not going to go be a background actor today. And so that day we were like, anyone on set who can be in this food fight. And I remember my assistant, Kayla Brooks, was like, I'll be at the party, but I don't want to be in the food fight. And Alyssa, God bless her, was like, I'm in. And then she just like really, really went for it.
Well, Sophia, one of the things that Auden talks about with The Quest is that these are things she's seen teenagers do in pop culture. So were there particular pop culture food fights that were touchstones for you? I think you can't help but think of something like Animal House in this instance.
Well, actually, like Sarah, I think Sarah said earlier that she wasn't a great student, but has a lot of stories. And that is sort of could equally be a description of me. And when I was in high school, I think it was my summer between high school and college, I had a very intense cake fight with a friend. A summer I lived in Maine. And so it wasn't necessarily like a pop culture reference that I was referencing. I was like, oh, it was like that cake fight with me and Morgan. Like, and then for the night swim, that's something that I had also done one summer in college with a bunch of friends from a party in San Diego. Like we were at this party at a house and someone just screamed like, let's go swimming. And we all stormed the beach like a bunch of wild animals in the middle of the night from this party. And so I think I was more drawing from my own life necessarily than things I'd read about or seen in books in a really fun way. Because then we would be filming them and I would like tell the cast all these stories. It was like, I would like forget that I'd done something and be like, oh, that's why I put this in the script. I did this once. You'd be like, you don't remember? I'd be like, no, now it's just like the movie to me. But
Sarah, you do have a lot of these set pieces in the book, including the food fight. Was there something you were most excited to see brought to life?
I loved the idea of Auden learning how to ride the bike. And that turns out to not be like as huge as like we're all talking about the food fight a lot more and everything. But I have to give credit to Emma because there is a great montage scene where it is Auden in a nutshell. It's like she is not giving up, and she is going to keep going. And it's just, I loved that because some of this came from me being a new mom, but it also came from me seeing something on television about people in New York who were like in their 20s that had never learned to ride a bike and were going to Central Park to take lessons and how terrifying it was. And I thought it would be really scary to learn to ride a bike when you're an adult, because when you're a kid, you just don't even know what falling off a bike really feels like. But as an adult, you're well aware of, what's going to happen. So I loved that. And I loved how it sort of builds to that in many ways.
There's a good tidbit about that because they had Emma in makeup sometimes for bruises following that scene. And the next day, I said to Lindsay DeSarno, one of her makeup artists, wow, that looks fantastic. And Emma's like, that is a real bruise. And because she was going down, I mean, you took a lot of falls.
This was one of the very first days we were shooting, and this is like a dream come true experience for me and one of my first of this scale. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go for it, and I'm not going to stop until they need me to, and I'm never going to say that I'm hurting, and I'm always going to. And so I was like, let's do this. And we just did so many takes, but it was so fun because they actually let me fall and they taught me how to fall. And I did end up with so many bruises that we had to then cover up with makeup, but it's all part. I mean, that's the whole BMX thing, right? It's like what is it? What do they say in the book? It's like, they're like battle scars that you're proud of. Right. So I was like, I had
They're badges of honor.
You definitely got your first battle scar. Emma was such a champ that day. She fell off that bike so many times and like got up with a smile and was like, I'm okay. Let's go again.
It's called Along for the Ride. So whether it's the BMX stuff or Auden learning to ride, that's a big part of the storytelling. So both as actors and director, I mean, what was it like filming that? I would imagine there's a stunt team involved and things like that.
It was super cool. I actually grew up riding a BMX bike, and I took it to the curb the summer before I got the job. And I was like, well, that's the end of that. And then I showed up in North Carolina. They're like, here, get on this bike. And I was like, absolutely. And it was like so much nicer than the one I used to have as a kid. And so I was super excited to like reinvigorate my passion, because in middle school, I told my mom, I'm going to be a professional BMX rider. I don't care what you say. And she's like, it's just a phase. And I was like, no, this is what I'm going to do. So of course that didn't pan out, but then I got to live it for like a few months in North Carolina. Working with the stunt team was one of my favorite parts of doing this film. Our stunt coordinator, Peter King, is like this rugged, tactically built dude with like the biggest heart and just the nicest guy. My stunt double, Rob Armour's a professional BMX rider in North Carolina, and watching what he could do on the bike was just unfathomable. I got to hang out with him, a couple other pro riders, and even like take some lessons with Ryan Nyquist, who is literally like the GOAT of BMX, which was an absolute trip for me. Because like I knew these guys growing up, watching X Games and everything. And then to like go to Ryan Nyquist's house in his backyard, like at the park, and just like hang out and go to parks with groups of guys around town and just kind of like, see how they hang out. How do they hang out on the bike? Like all those little intricacies of that community was extremely fulfilling for me. I loved it.
And Sophia, I mean, this being your first movie you directed, BMX biking sequences are not a two-shot of two people talking. So, I mean, was that intimidating? How did you come at it?
It was surprising. Well, so we're at the Ogden skate park for the BMX sequence at this huge bowl, like so many stunt performers. Rob Armour, who Belle mentioned, is incredible. We've got these huge cranes. We're doing all of these wild shots, and I'm drinking a Red Bull for the first time since college. And I looked around and thought, like, I'm a playwright. Like, how am I directing this BMX movie? How did that happen? If you had asked me like 10 years ago, like, what do you think your first movie is going to be about? I think it would have taken me many answers to get to extreme sports. But
it's like, I think we're going to do the double tail whip in a wide.
But it was such a part of the story, it was just so present in there. And Luca Del Pupo, the DP, and I like meticulously shortlisted this movie for weeks in prep. And so by the time we got there, it just felt very exciting, and I felt prepared and ready for it, but it was also incredibly surprising. Like when I took those moments to step outside myself in the situation, I was just sort of astounded by what we were doing. It seemed a little off brand, but
so like, I thought I was directing a rom-com. I don't know. Sarah, when you were writing that in the aughts, was that very much of the moment? Because like I seem to remember growing up, there was a lot of Disney Channel original movies about BMX biking.
I think it did have a period, but when I was writing that book, my husband had gotten back into riding. And so we actually had like a jump park in our backyard. We had a pump track, And so, while I was working on this book with my baby, I'd look out and someone would be just flying by, because people would come over to do the jumps and everything. And then eventually my husband broke his sternum jumping. And so that kind of knocked him out of the biking for a while. And then he went into racing cars. So no book about that yet. But I grew up with guys on BMX, here in Chapel Hill where I grew up, we used to all go downtown, and all the boys I hung out with rode BMX, and they had half pipes at their houses. And it was just like, it was that and skateboards, growing up here. And because I was asked, since it's at the beach, why aren't they surfing? And I was like, well, I don't know anything about surfing, but I know things about BMX, because if you hang around enough, you can learn about anything. So, and it just lent itself really well also to this story, because I think it is such a primal sort of coming of age thing to learn how to ride a bike, and whether you know or whether you don't. And Auden being so perfect in checking every box. This is a pretty big box, not to have checked.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask about the prom at the end of the story. It's moved from sort of this community bash to more of an impromptu prom that Auden's friends throw for her. Sophia, how did you come to that change?
So I knew I didn't want it to be a community event, because I didn't want the end of our teen rom-com to have all the adults there. I just thought that wasn't as fun. But when I think about the story of the movie, I think if this were real life, for me, the story ends at that moment after they have their sort of reconciliatory talk in the skate park. And, it's clear that they are not angry at one another anymore. They forgive one another. They understand one another, but it's not really it's not really clear if they'll have a relationship after that moment. And I think that's very real, where you go through these experiences with someone and then you're like, we're cool, but you don't know if that door is necessarily open for something more. But then that moment where she looks in the mirror the next morning and she slept through the night, and she takes a shower and she looks at herself. And in that moment, I think she just feels like, okay, all of this stuff happened and I'm okay with myself. I went through this summer and I'm good. And I think that's the real life place the movie ends, or maybe the indie movie version of where the movie ends. But because it's a teen rom-com, and because we're in the business of wish fulfillment, that moment after you feel like I'm good with myself, of course you want the guy you like to be sitting on your lawn in a tuxedo. That's just the next place. And so then this idea that it's just the kids and they're like, we are going to throw this prom for you, but it's really a party for all of us, I just felt like was so fun. And, we've seen a lot of proms that are the traditional prom at prom. And I think in my first draft of the movie, my initial idea was that they would go back to the pie shop, and it wouldn't even be all of these kids, it'd just be their best friends, our core group at the pie shop, and they might not even necessarily be dressed up. It's just Auden gets to wear her dress and they're like, it's your prom. And Auden and Eli have invited the group back to their secret place to open it up, because it's not just about the two of them, it's about everyone. But that didn't feel quite exciting enough or big enough. And thank God we didn't do it, because that pie shop was just legitimately not big enough. But it's such a summer movie that where do you want to be? You want to be on the beach. And I think the party that we created and the prom that we created, it's not so specific as to if you didn't go to your high school prom, you couldn't do something like this. The idea of getting dressed up with your friends and dancing on the beach and playing games and eating pizza, that's something we could do at any age. And then again, a personal story. I was once at a wedding where we all jumped in the water in our formal wear. And so that, it's just so fun. It's just so fun. I love that they run into the water in their dresses at the end. And it's just yes, I wanted to wear this dress, but it's also not about the dress. It's about being with my friends and being with Eli and having this great time.
Yeah. Emma and Belmont, it looked cold. Was it cold?
I think it was, I don't think it was that cold.
I think we made it look warm.
Yeah. This was the last day that a lot of the friend group actors were there. And so after shooting with them for a couple of weeks, we all got extremely close. And so to then have this celebration that really did feel like a celebration. We were just able to have fun on the beach, and they were handheld cameras. So we were really able to just like have fun with each other.
Yeah.
It really like genuinely felt like a celebration, just like it is in the movie. I actually have to say, I think that was my absolute favorite day shooting. Yeah.
We had already done night swim at that point, so it wasn't cold at all. we had so much fun though. Like Emma said, it was like a nice big send off for the rest of the cast.
It was so fun.
And we'd gotten together on the weekends, and now we got to do it on camera. We just had a blast. It was wonderful.
Pizza.
Yeah, it was great. Emma actually was super good at batting, so I don't know if you'd call him cornhole, but you were talented.
It was beginner's luck, but thank you.
Oh yeah, there's a shot in the movie where Emma gets it in, and Belle's like, but it was like a legit reaction.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Well, because my hand-eye coordination is astonishingly bad, and so it was really a miracle that happened on camera.
That was first try too. I mean, like on camera, you just never fail to impress me.
Okay.
That song that we play at Beach Bash, it's a girls' song called "Lust for Life." We played that about 10 million times while we were doing the Beach Bash. So everyone was thoroughly sick of that song by the end of the day. And I'm sure that just beach goers on Carolina Beach were as well, because there was hours and hours of that song being played.
That song was when I was in middle school. That was one of my favorite songs of all time. And I was like, this is what being a teenager feels like. This is Lust for Life. It's amazing. And so then it kind of also felt so perfect how it would be for this.
Oh, I love that. Well, I think the final Beach Bash is a perfect place for us to end things. Thank you so much for all of your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maureen. It was so nice talking to you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this chapter of Screen After Reading. If you liked what you heard, follow, rate the podcast, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. To keep the conversation going, follow Entertainment Weekly on all socials, @EW on Twitter and @Entertainment Weekly everywhere else. You can also tag me @TheMaureen Lee. This episode of Screen After Reading is hosted by Maureen Lee Linker, produced by Maureen Lee Linker, Clarissa Cruz, Chanel Johnson, and Sammy Junio.